Now I would like to present Professor Christoph Dietrich. The first presentation. Principle and clinical application for the electrography ultrasound, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for the invitation to that beautiful country of Vietnam. I'm more than happy to be here and to discuss with you some issues of elastography. My agenda will be to give a few introductory words, a recommendation what to read about the techniques, to give examples, a few words on strain imaging, on shear wave elastography, on staging of liver disease, and a conclusion. 2013, the European Federation of Societies for Ultrasound in Medicine and Biology, EFSUM, published guidelines on basic principles, part 1, and clinical applications. And those papers can be free to download at the EFSUM website. A little later, the World Federation of Ultrasound published also 3 guidelines on basic principles, on the liver and on the breast.
You're ready.
And most recently on the prostate and thyroid. Professor Richard Barr was one of the responsibles for that. If I'm allowed to explain a few words, I might say that here is the term elastography or elastometry, which could be pretty much the same, but people agreed to use elastography. And there is shear wave elastography on the left side and strain imaging on the right side. Shear wave elastography might be transient elastography as shown in FibroScan, point shear wave elastography using ARFI, acoustic radiation force impulse imaging, using Siemens and Philips and others, and 2D shear wave elastography using, for example, supersonic imaging. On the other side, strain imaging is the quasi-static imaging. You press and you release and you get images by this method. So as shown, also the manufacturers have different names for different forms, what I have explained, but the terminology as explained, transient elastography, point shear wave elastography, and 2D elastography for shear wave elastography. This is what we talk about. And the method is best evaluated in the liver. And at Mergentheim, a very small town where I'm living, 23,000 inhabitants. I learned here in Ho Chi Minh City there are 10 million, so a little more. We have a few ultrasound machines where we learned to compare the data and to get experience. just to introduce shear wave elastography using transient elastography equipped in the FibroScan, you will get a value which is expressed, or which has been expressed in the past, in kilopascal. You might be interested, and I am as well, if elastography should be displayed in meters per second or in kilopascal. Who believes that kilopascal is the right unit? Raise your hand. Who believes meter per second is the right unit for elastography? Raise your hand. You measure velocity, so the physically appropriate term would be, since you measure velocity, meter per second. But it can be calculated in kilopascal as well. So this is the transient elastography. The advantage, almost 80% of all published data all over the world has been done with this system. The disadvantage, it does not show so far ultrasound images. So we have an advantage and a disadvantage. Point shear wave elastography is the second most prominent feature. The second most data have been published using point shear wave elastography, and you have a box which you cannot change, and you get reliable data. FibroScan using transient elastography, you make 10 measurements. Point shear wave elastography, you make 10 measurements as well. And you give the median and the interquartile range, which means the value from 25% to the median and 75% to the median divided through the median. So this gives you a quality parameter of your data. A second point shear wave elastography, here you have that Siemens platform. The Philips platform is pretty much the same. Here you have that Hitachi platform in the same healthy subject. Here we have that GE platform presenting in the same patient. Here we have that supersonic 2D images for the same patient. And here we have that Philips example, and here Toshiba, which is now called Canon. So what we did in Bad Mergentheim to get experience in healthy subjects and in diseased patients for all that different equipment to see what is comparable and what is not. If you are interested to read details about all that techniques, go on the EFSUM website, European Federation of Societies for Ultrasound Medicine and Biology, and you will find that table. It explains the method, the type of force, the applied force, and it gives illustrations. So still this table, even published 2013, is valid today, and it's the principle what we are talking about. Now I will introduce a few words into strain imaging. And what we talk about strain imaging, a quasi-static imaging, is that we press manually or by an instrument, by a probe, into a tissue, and the stiff tissue will get less compression, and the soft tissue can be compressed much stronger. And then you can code which is stiff or soft. No. It's no absolute value. It's a comparative value. You compare this lesion with the surrounding tissue. And we see that the lesion here, blue is stiffer in that method, is stiffer than the surrounding tissue. So it's not absolute, a value, it's a comparison, stiffer or softer. Here you can see a lipoma in the stomach. And we would love, as we know that fatty tissue is soft, if that lipoma might display soft tissue as a proof of feasibility. And you can see nicely it is green and red, it is softer than the surrounding. So this lipoma in the inner layers of the stomach, without any biopsy, can be judged as soft, typical lipoma, and this has a consequence. We do not need to perform surgery, and we do not need to perform biopsy. So before we use such a new method, we should be sure that all our results have a consequence. And here we have a clear consequence: no biopsy, no removal. How to do it right, strain imaging. So if you look that this lesion is in the center of the probe, then you do it right. Because if you have a curved transducer, you press in the center and not in the periphery, then you have the real image. If you go to the periphery of a curved transducer, there is less pressure, less deformation of tissue, and the system assumes it is stiffer because it does not move as much under compression. So always be sure that you perform strain imaging in the center and not in the periphery. Now about shear wave elastography. It's a traveling of compressional. We know that traveling of compressional waves implies change in pressure and density at different points. And the shear wave progresses at speeds which are related to the density of the tissue. The denser the tissue, the higher the speed. Then they may be origin as compressional waves, but the shear wave is compressional wave, but the shear wave is perpendicular. It is much slower. Normal ultrasound 1560 meters per second in the liver, somewhat. Shear wave in the liver is much slower, 1 meter per second. Much slower, much lower signals. And the shear wave attenuation is high. So we cannot measure deep inside of a big body. Now go through a few examples. Do you know where the FibroScan technology came from? It's a French company. What do you think about if you hear about French? We think about cheese. And it is a quality parameter of cheese they used that transient elastography in the manufacturing of that beautiful cheese of France. And then they learned why not looking for organs which can be nicely displayed. And then they made it easy. All over the world, ultrasound in many countries is done by radiologists. And they were thinking about the market of hepatologists. Radiologists are bright, smart, intelligent, and so on. Hepatologists are stupid and uniform. So they made a machine which you have only to press a button, boom, 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 and then you can measure liver stiffness. And they made that apparatus called FibroScan for hepatologists for a huge amount of money, and it was sold all over the world. And most studies, the most biopsy-proved studies, have been done by FibroScan. It is called transient elastography. Be sure, transient elastography is a shear wave elastography. Terminology. Elastography or elastometry, shear wave elastography, transient elastography, point shear wave elastography, 2D shear wave elastography, and strain imaging. Those is the terminology we are talking about. There is a mechanically induced impulse, a thump, and it is at the tissue surface. It will be displayed as kilopascal, right now also as meter per second. The measurement is by meter per second, and it is commercially implemented in echosens. One might tell that GE and echosens right now produce a machine where the FibroScan technology is implemented in the GE technology, if you might be interested. The second and more, how to say, for imaging people interesting method is the point shear wave mode. It is implemented in an ultrasound image, and it's called point shear wave elastography using a certain technology. And this technology is called RFI, or more complicated, acoustic radiation force impulse imaging. And that's the terminology. The applied force, it's ultrasound induced. The shear wave speed will be displayed. It can be displayed as a quantitative or qualitative measurement. It will be given in a single ROI, and it's commercially implemented right now in many manufacturers, first by Siemens, but later on also by Philips, Isarauto, Mindray, whatever. And here you can see, also one interesting difference. The FibroScan using transient elastography does not allow ascites. You have to exclude ascites beforehand. Here you can see that point shear wave elastography might be used in patients with ascites as well. You cannot measure within the fluid, avoid it, but you can measure through the fluid in the deeper located liver. And it's called virtual touch quantification. If I go through all the terminology of the different companies, it would take more than 1 hour. But recall the terminology I explained by strain imaging, transient elastography, point shear wave elastography, 2D elastography, then we cover all that names of all that companies. And here you can see that the velocity is displayed, the depth where you measure, and a little later I will explain where to measure, what to do, and so on. And right now, in the new versions, we have also quality parameters which are the interquartile range. One more time, we can use point shear wave elastography also in patients with ascites. And here you can see it's 3 meters per second. Here you can see in a healthy subject it's 1 meter per second. So we are sure that our results are good. The French manufacturer Supersonic had very fast computers. They were thinking not to use only a point, but they reflected, why not taking a 2D, an area, or a 3D, a volume, for calculating liver tissue. And the applied force is also a radiation force focus, which is pretty fast because you have to cover a larger area. And they display the shear wave speed. It's quantitative and it is implemented not only in supersonic, also in Siemens technology and in others as well. Here you can see an example of that T2D. If we look for no fibrosis, 0, you have that blue. If you see, and you have a homogeneous tissue, one take-home message: the quality of a parameter is very good in healthy livers for almost all systems. There's almost no error. The higher the fibrosis, the heterogeneous the liver parenchyma, and the higher the natural error of your results, because the liver is heterogeneous and gives you different values. So intermediate range, a little bit more heterogeneous. Look for F0, no fibrosis. Wow, homogeneous. A little bit heterogeneous, higher values. F2 or 3, it's getting brighter. F3 to 4, green to red. And here F4, heterogeneous, and you can not only see the quantitative value, which was 31 kilopascal, but you can see also the quality by colors. And here you can see huge values. If we have a liver cirrhosis, we are interested to exclude it or to prove it. And if a liver cirrhosis is proven, the treatment changes. Then higher values will be proportional to the risk to develop HCC, hepatocellular carcinoma. So all that values have an important issue. And there are 2 key questions we have to answer. First, to exclude cirrhosis in virus hepatitis C, because the treatment will be shorter by different drugs and no ribavirin as an additional drug. If you have cirrhosis, 8 weeks treatment for non-cirrhosis. If you have cirrhosis, at least 12-week treatment, eventually different drugs, and you have to add ribavirin to be successful. So this method has a real value in daily life. And in Germany, Europe, and I guess also in some places in the States, you are not anymore allowed to do liver biopsy, because this takes a little risk, but a little risk. You can do it without a risk, to say no or yes, liver cirrhosis. Strain imaging, that was the other method, can be also used for assessing liver fibrosis, but this is not the topic of my talk. It's a very interesting way to do it, but, and there have been some good data, but it's more complicated than just pushing a button so I will not go into that. Here you can find the current EFSOM guidelines, which are free available, and the World Federation will be publishing in a few weeks also their new guidelines, and Richard Barr is the leader of this issue. During that process, we have been coming together and we had a discussion about all that subject to make clear statements for all people over the world to come and come in a good discussion process, and sometimes we had also fun together. It was a very good collaboration. So coming together, I have been explaining about there is published evidence, very good published evidence, which has been published by the European and World Federation. I have explaining terminology, and I've been explaining examples of point shear wave elastography, transient elastography, and 2D elastography, mainly for the liver. And we had some staging examples. And finally, I hope there will be a little bit more brightness in that dark image. Thank you so much for your attention. So I wonder about a discussion. There should be many comments and there should be many questions.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It's very clear for the basic elastography. And we will continue the second topic, and the discussion will be at the end of the session. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I will continue. Now we have already focused on the liver, and honestly, the liver, if you look through all applications, has a clear-cut evidence, a yes-no response. If we have low values, it will influence our treatment. It is of clinical importance. In other imaging methods, we have to find out. I wonder about your presentation, how clear we can answer questions in the breast, in the prostate, in the testis, and in other organs. There might be one question in your mind. One question. Why is red in my images stiff, and you Asian people feel in a very different way? I learned that you might feel that red is dangerous, is a little bit more stiff. Here you can see at Galapagos volcanoes, you can see an eruption, and that looks dangerous. So if you feel that red should be the stiff color, you can change the button and it will be red. So don't care about, have a look to the scale and you see what is stiffer or not. We had a meeting all over the world, and we had that Western and Eastern people, and we were very peaceful together, but we couldn't find a solution which is the real red and stiff or soft tissue. And so please feel free to use a color, but indicate on the left side which scale you used. So the agenda is pretty much the same. I will go through a little bit the guidelines. I will give a few information about level of evidence, grade of recommendation, and the consensus. There will be an image of my laboratory And we will talk about the limitations of biopsy, the recommendations according to guidelines, and a few words about normal values, reliability and comparison of systems, and finally a conclusion. Where it comes from that we use elastography. So if I meet nice people like you, I would go through all of you and shake hands. Some of you will press my hand very strongly, other a little bit shy, only the fingers, and the other one I do not know. But I will learn a little bit about your character, how you present to me by shaking hands, by shaking elasticity, stiffness, how you present yourself and how I am presenting myself. And Jason, a Greek, he was palpating the liver many years ago. If you go to London, you can see in the British Museum that elasticity was a big issue 2,000 years ago. And it's even more issue right now. As mentioned, you will find those guidelines on the liver, and here you see the website where you can download not only this guideline, but also a textbook, examination technique videos on how to perform, and so on. And if you are interested, there's also a paper on normal values. We have to be sure that each company has a little bit different normal values because they use a different technology. Think at the edge. If you have values good below 6 kilopascal, if I use kilopascal, then almost all machines, if they use the right algorithm, will exclude liver cirrhosis, advanced fibrosis. If you have values above 15, almost all systems will have somewhat liver cirrhosis. So think at the edge, and then you will get some comparable data. In between, there is a huge overlap, and we have to learn for the specific machines and settings, and even an Asian population. If I'm standing in the elevator, here I feel we are bigger and larger, so some of you are smaller, so I feel that difference, and it must be also a difference in normal values in an Asian population and in an European or American population. I learned that you are even stronger than we are, so that might be of importance. Eventually you might have heard or you are familiar with a scientific value of a method. The level of evidence, the grade of recommendation, and a consensus of experienced people. The level of evidence means that something has been, how to say, is effective. So there might be sedative drugs which give you a sleep. There was a German drug, Contergan, which had a high level of evidence. It was a good sleeping pill. Grade of recommendation. It was cruelsome. People who have been pregnant and were born had embryological anomalies. So even that had a high level of evidence to be a good sedative medication, the grade of recommendation should have been below zero, because the risk-benefit ratio did not allow to give such a drug. And then, if there are no published studies, there's a group of experienced doctors who come together and to raise hands to get a consensus if a new method, even not published data are available, is of advantage or not. So all that guidelines we are talking about have that 3 steps: level of evidence, grade of recommendation, risk-benefit, advantage, disadvantage, measurement, and the consensus. Okay, I already showed that image, and Xinbu Shui was Chinese. I met in China. He spent 4 years with me, and some of the data we got is also due to his really energy. Thank you, Shui. The limitations of biopsy, there is a risk, a small risk, but it's not zero, that there might be bleeding, infection, whatever. And there is a second problem. Look to that liver. This is a fibrous strand. And the biopsy in the liver with that fibrous strands could be at the edge. You can see no fibrous strand. Even the patient has fibrosis. You can see here, it was next to the fibrous strand and does not display any. So it would be almost no fibrosis. If you go into the center, you get the whole fibrous strand in your biopsy. You can see, wow, this is liver cirrhosis. But there has been normal parenchyma in between. So looking where you have that biopsy, you could get F0 up to liver cirrhosis. So there is not only a risk of a liver biopsy, there is also the danger to get no representative material, because the specimen is so small. And here you can see from 0 to liver cirrhosis, anything could be measured. And the idea of that ultrasound method is to get a more representative sample, which is larger and might reflect better the situation in the whole entire liver. Okay, let us go through a few recommendations. The examination should be done via an intercostal approach on the right side. Please do not measure in the median line. Do it right intercostally. And you can see there was a strong consensus, and we have pretty good evidence that this is right. Second, measure below the liver capsule, at least 10 millimeters, better 20. If you measure next to the liver capsule, the values will be stiffer. And you will not have, you will overestimate liver fibrosis, okay? Don't measure below 6 centimeters of the liver capsule, because the values will be lower. I showed you that shear wave elastography has attenuation in the depth, so the values will be worse. Go for a fast of at least 2 hours. 3 or 4 might even be better, and a rest of 10 minutes. If you come from jogging and do some exercise, there might be increased pressure and congestion of the liver, and you might have too high values, an overestimation. So rest is recommended and a fast is recommended. Before you do any kind of measurement, ask yourself, what is the benefit for the patient after I am performing this examination? Look for the benefit. You might think also about your benefit by doing this examination, earning some money. That might be also an incentive, but I'm looking for the patient. if you use elastography for a patient with hepatitis C, the question is to show if there's normal liver parenchyma, shorter treatment, other drugs, no ribavirin, or if there is liver cirrhosis. And then you have to change your treatment, you have to give it longer, it will be much more expensive, and you have to give in some circumstances genotype 3, for example, also ribavirin. So if I'm doing elastography in a patient with chronic virus hepatitis C before treatment, it has a clear benefit for the patient to know the result. That is what I want. And then before you do your examination, have a fast, have a rest, look for all measure below 10 millimeters of the liver capsule, and in your mind and in your knowledge, exclude liver inflammation. If the transaminases are 5 times higher, there's inflammatory activity, and the results may overestimate fibrosis. Exclude obstructive cholestasis. Bile duct should be normal. Exclude, most important, congestion. And exclude infiltrative liver disease. This is important to know before you push the button. The most important, if I would say that there is a single most important recommendation, then this is the most important single recommendation. Shear-wave elastography within the normal range can rule out significant liver fibrosis. That's it. That's the most important take-home message. Then the 10 measurements for echosens, fibroscan, transient elastography, 10 measurements for point shear-wave elastography, for 2 shear-wave elastography, 3 measurements are recommended. So you have not to go for 10 according to published evidence and according to the guidelines. And as mentioned, you can see that the interquartile range, that means all that values between 25 and 75 divided by the median, should be less than 30%. In normal values, you will be much better normally if you are a good examiner. In liver cirrhosis, you might get even higher values and you have still representative data because liver cirrhosis is heterogeneous. As mentioned, the median value of at least 10 measurements should be used. And I already mentioned 2D shear-wave elastography does not need those 10 measurements. I mentioned the most important statement that all shear-wave elastography methods can rule out significant liver fibrosis. First most important. The second most important statement is if you have really high values, higher than 15 kilopascal, then the second most important statement is you can prove advanced fibrosis. To exclude, better. To prove liver cirrhosis, second most important statement. If you have excluded congestion, inflammatory activity, and so on. So the same is true with a little less evidence. First, transient elastography, second, point shear-wave elastography, third, 2D shear-wave elastography. But in a daily work, you can use all that 3 machines for those 2 questions, to exclude liver cirrhosis, to prove liver cirrhosis. And I mentioned the second important information is if you have 15 kilopascal or 75 kilopascal, the prognosis will go down. The higher the value, the more complicated is liver cirrhosis, the development of hepatocellular carcinoma, portal hypertension, and other complications. About normal values, I already mentioned. If you go into detail, you have to look for the technology. Even if you use a 4 megahertz transducer or a 6 megahertz transducer, normal values might change. So be sure that you know the table of confidence, all that knowledge about your equipment, that you know your normal values. We have been summarized, it was a huge amount of workload about 1 year ago, all that normal values, and this has been published in that paper. The reliability quality parameter has been published for different equipment. Here you can find the equipment of Hitachi. We have been going through that quality parameters, but this has been true for other equipments and technologies as well. And the big point was the interquartile range divided by the median. It can be displayed here as a graphic. It can be displayed as a number. Almost all systems now display it. You might ask, and what about focal liver lesions? Do we get an important information? I would say yes and no. Here you can find a focal fatty sparing, and you can see normal values. So I use it very often in clinical practice to get additional information. But this information does not give you a yes-no response. Cholangiocellular carcinoma and metastasis in generally have the highest values. Focal nodular hyperplasia, FNH, is a local cirrhosis, displays very stiff values as well. So there's an overlap of benign and malignant lesions. But I'm not so much interested in the measurement of shear wave velocity within the lesion. I'm interested in almost all lesions, how is the parenchyma in the surrounding. So shear wave elastography is very useful for the determination of the surrounding liver parenchyma. So that's it. And finally come to that conclusion. We have been going through the scientific evidence of the level of evidence, grade of recommendation and consensus. We have been talking about limitations of biopsy, the risk of bleeding, for example, but also the representative, very small sample size. We have been going through some recommendations, let's say 6 out of 30. If you are interested, go to the EFSO website, you will get all that others. We have been thinking about normal values, reliability, and comparison of systems. And this is my final conclusion. And you might have seen my image before. I hope it will be a little brighter. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Christoph Direct, with the presentation, very interesting and update. Now we have the next